good for everything else.
Yeah, yeah. And we're live now. How does that?
Oh, we're live.
Okay, listen. Sometime we're gonna actually start going at 11:11. But Carl, during this little bit of live, just before we go live, as Arthur gets the links for us to share and people start getting revved up and onto the show. An exciting show, everybody. We're going to start in just a moment. We're going to be talking about accessibility. It's a big thing for all business owners. It's big. It should be part of what you're thinking about. You're probably not thinking about it if you're the average business owner. But it's going to become even more important as time goes on. So, Carl, I have dad jokes for you. Are you ready for a dad joke?
Yes,
Just to fill
absolutely.
up a little bit of space while Arthur is sorting out everything. Okay, so a few days, weeks ago, I took on the challenge of finding um, a dad joke around a particular word. I'm not going to tell you the word because I don't want to give away the joke. Okay, so during coronavirus, during this COVID-19, during this pandemic, the Queen actually has beefed up her security detail. Okay, her guard, right? So the people who are guarding her, mainly to keep everybody else socially distanced from her. And do you know what they call those guards?
No,
The sneeze guard.
the sneeze guard. All right.
There you go. And my word was sneeze, so I
That is-
needed to figure out how to do it.
right. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a
Huh?
dad. That's definitely a dad joke.
That's such a dad joke. I am so super proud to be a dad, and I'm so super proud of that joke.
I gotta say
Yeah.
though, Brent, you threw me for a loop. I was expecting you to go somewhere with beef eater.
What?
Beef eater.
Well, you started by saying she beefed up her security.
Oh, okay. Hey, dads are known to throw people a little bit of
A
what is it?
curveball.
A red herring. Okay,
Yeah.
so Carl, you kind of good to go?
Well, I don't. I feel apprehensive because I was told that there was something to do with sunglasses with
Do you
these
have
things.
your shades?
I do.
Okay, put your shades on because now is the time to get the show started. There we go. Nice.
You've tuned in to COVID Marketing with Brent Kobayashi and Arthur Tutt, the show to support small business not just to survive, but to thrive.
That's right. We are live with episode number 83, the show to support small business, not just to survive, but to thrive. Week daily at 11 Eastern Standard Time. If you have questions on marketing and business or, well, whatever, you let us know in the comments wherever you fine folk are seeing this. I'm Brent Kobayashi, president of Kobayashi Zeitgeist, a marketing agency here in Toronto, Canada. And with me is Mr. Arthur Tutt, a marketing specialist at the KZ. I'm going American right now because with me is Mr. Karl Groves, who is from the American. With me, joining us now, today with us is Karl Groves. That's right, the founder and president of Tendon.io. Karl is an IT consultant who has worked with some of the biggest companies in the world, including several major agencies, the U.S. government. He is a leading expert on the topic of website accessibility. He has special and extensive knowledge on this topic. He's spoken on this topic. I've seen him speak on this topic. I know that he has the capacity to speak on this topic. We are super lucky to have you, and we're super lucky to have us with us today, Mr. Karl Groves. Good to meet you.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me.
Dude, listen, before we really get into this, because I know a lot of people that are watching this right now are kind of going, accessibility, what? So what is accessibility? Let's start right at the beginning.
It's funny you asked that because it to me it seems so obvious, but I do hear people say, well, does that mean whether the website has good uptime? But no, in this case, it really is sort of akin to what you would consider to be physical accessibility, and that is just kind of whether or not a person with a disability is going to be able to access in this case, your website. More software is also included. Software, hardware, documents, all that sort of stuff is kind of the things that we work on. Web app,
Okay, so
or mobile apps, all those sorts of things.
okay, so this is somebody with primarily focused on somebody that has challenges or a disability, that maybe people that are building websites, we'll talk about websites in this case, because that's what the majority of our audience will be interested in, might not be able to use or use as effectively or as efficiently.
Yeah.
All right,
And
so
there's a variety of concerns in those cases where we're thinking about someone who can't necessarily use a mouse, right? Because they have a mobility impairment or something like that, or fine motor control problems, or someone who can't see the screen, can't see the screen well, that sort of thing. And for someone who's deaf, can they access the audio content as well?
gotcha. So just to put this a little bit further into context, for myself, right? 52-year-old, pretty, I wouldn't necessarily consider myself anywhere near needing any assistance. However, I love to use the keyboard for efficiency. Boy, does it ever bother me when I can't use the keyboard in many cases on websites. I have actually found that from a site perspective, especially if I'm on a smaller laptop, I'm like, I can't really read this very well. I'd like it to be a more comfortable read, perhaps in my particular case. That's accessibility, that's usability. The other thing that I found interesting, and one of your colleagues, you know Mr. Billy, right? Billy Gregory. You've done some shows with him. I always loved how he described it as, quite often you're doing this almost for your future self. Because as much as you might think of accessibility as either blind or deaf or physical impairments, at the same time, it's actually everybody at different points in their spectrum in their life. So
if you think about it, I would say if we're lucky, we would require accessibility, right? If we're lucky, we would be eventually require, because what you find in the statistics is as age increases, the rate of disability increases. So when you get to that 75 years, 80 years range, the rate of disability for people is somewhere around 75%. So if we're lucky, we'll live that long to need an accessible website.
I like that. So how did you become an expert on this topic?
Well, we have limited time, so I'm not going to give you the full story, but basically, because I live in the DC area, and I started my web career when Section 508 started becoming enforced in the United States, which was around 2000. It became the thing that was preventing me from getting a job as a web developer, because they would check my work, they'd run it through Bobby or something like that, and it would come back and it was inaccessible. And so literally accessibility was keeping me from getting a job. So I was like, okay, I'm going to know as much about this as I possibly can so that this is no longer a problem for me.
Gotcha.
And then I sort of, after time, I just sort of decided, you know what, this is really cool. There's a difference. There's a real tangible difference between the quality work that I would do and an actual impact on the user at the other side of the screen. For a lot of developers, we're just writing code, and we just make sure it does the thing that we're told that it has to do when we create it. But I like the idea that if I did a good job, I could articulate exactly how that quality of that job is going to be better for real people on the other side of the screen, and I really like that. So.
I like that a lot, because one of the things when you're doing web development, especially, and sometimes you can lose this, is an empathy for the person, the user on the other side, accessible or not. It's just that thinking of, how is this actually going to be put into use? What is the function? And it gets lost so many times, and it creates frustration straight across the board.
Yeah. I feel like you can tell sometimes when a developer's never used their own work. You know what I mean? Because you'll go through something, you go, man, that is preposterously stupid. this thing doesn't do whatever we think it should be able to do, like keyboard access on something that is only click accessible. And it's like you said earlier a couple minutes ago, you're a keyboard user. You're more efficient that way, right? It's not,
Yeah.
all right, I'm gonna go here and click this thing and go here and do that thing, and you like to tab through the controls and all that sort of stuff, and you could think through like, yeah, that seems like a no-brainer. And if only the developer had used their stuff, they know that they had created a frustration for probably everybody.
Websites, brands, they do so much to try to make the experience like a great positive experience. Like if you walk into a store, you're going to have a certain greeting at the front and all that kind of stuff. But when you sit down in a website and you start filling out a form and you press tab, and it's now for and you can't, now you have to reach for the mouse, you now have to do this, and it doesn't do what you want it to actually, or you start typing in the year and it doesn't actually even do anything with that. Like all of those little things that happen that just pull you away. And sure, many, and that's the thought, there's a lot of people that can deal with that, and it's like a little annoyance or whatever it is. And then there's a certain portion that like that's maybe even a hard stop.
Yeah. And it piles up sometimes, right? So, some things that are just a minor annoyance, you can think through how the worse something gets, the more it goes from a minor annoyance to a blocker, because of frustration, right? Because the person's just going to get so angry at the experience that they're just like, I'm out. You know what I mean?
Angry at the experience, and especially in the competitive world, a marketplace like we have, all right, this one over here, this site over here, this company over here, you've got my business now, because other people aren't doing, in many cases, what is almost a basic level. It's not like you're saying like, okay, you got a $3,000 website, now it's a $30,000. It's not. It really literally isn't. It's just not thought about. It's not brought into best practices sometimes. Okay, so I'm curious, from a business perspective or even from a societal perspective, how are we going to see this topic of accessibility become more important in the year or years to come?
Well, I mean, I think there's two ways that we're going to see accessibility be recognized more. One of those, unfortunately, is the legal channels. At least in the United States, we have between 20 and 40 new ADA related lawsuits every single day, 365 days a year.
Wow. Okay.
That's unfortunate for two reasons. One is that it creates an atmosphere around accessibility that it's something that people are literally dragged into, right? So they think about this thing that they begrudgingly have to do for this legal threat issue, and so that's kind of bad because it creates automatically sort of an adversarial relationship around accessibility in general. So that's kind of the bad thing. But on the positive side, we do see innovations that improve accessibility in ways that were not intentional. What I mean by that is new technologies being created that are being brought to market that will have accessibility features in them that are just sort of side benefits. So like all the internet connected devices now, all the things that work with the I can't say the word because it's going to turn it on, but Alexa device.
Okay.
Because I have one by my computer. So. Google Home, all these sorts of things that now have accessibility benefits. And the more that we go to a environment where we can do input via voice because we are speaking to this device or something like that, and control all these sorts of things, the more we're going to see this sort of accessibility rise up to the occasion. They also pose their own new accessibility challenges, but I think that just that awareness of some of those things, I think might help people understand the need for accessibility if we keep that at the forefront.
It's really interesting that you mentioned voice, because I have been hearing it for maybe about 2 years that from a marketer business perspective, that voice is becoming or will be and shortly will be the big thing. And for you, that's one of the things to spend that whatever 10% maybe now of working on being able to handle the voice channels. And so if you're able to work through your site, your content, your authoring, your marketing, how you get to market, what you do and respond to, say, a voice command over at Alexa and Google Home and all that kind of stuff, then you might be serving a couple audiences there. One is people who just want to use voice, but also people who find that voice is a far more easier or accessible way for them to access your content.
Yeah.
The interesting thing as far as what's happening in recent times, you talked about a bit of a legal framework. I think my understanding is in Canada and Ontario, where we're at, there's less of a litigious thing happening. There's more of a, hey, this is a problem, can you fix it kind of thing happening. This is my understanding, talking with a few people. One of the things that is happening is everybody who's watching this, if you have a website or web content that is been created and published after the year 2012, so 8 years ago, by year 2021, January 2021, in Ontario, we have to be WCAG 2.0 level AA less a couple things compliant.
Yeah.
Like that's an actual legal requirement of all public facing websites, not just the big ones. Now, I do know some businesses who's like, well, that doesn't apply to me because my website was published in 2011 and I haven't touched it since. Okay. If that's your case, then legally you could possibly continue. But if you start publishing new content, then that content needs to be, and if your website framework is
new content is added since then.
It so that's one compelling reason. I guess let's get into if you're going to get started with accessibility. Oh, one other thing that I've also heard, and let me know if this is true. Google. The Google bot, that comes to see your site, the Google bot that is a big part of understanding whether or not you should be listed high in Google or low in Google. I've actually heard the argument that Google bot is essentially a disabled or needs accessibility to handle your site better.
A lot of people say that you can get SEO boosts from accessibility, and I don't know if anybody has ever really been able to quantify the exact effect that accessibility is going to have on SEO. But you can think through some of the on-page factors that do improve your ranking, such as good page titles, having good informative page titles, good heading structure.
Yeah.
Alt text on your images, all that sort of stuff. Easy navigation, so navigation that actually with a hypertext reference is a real URL. Those are all things that are beneficial for accessibility.
Well, those are all SEO things. Yes.
And the other one that's an off-page factor is the text in the link that refers you to the other page. So if you're using crappy link text to go from page to page, then that's going to be impactful for SEO as well as accessibility. So those are some things that I think are kind of no-brainers. And they're also kind of an area where we can start getting our marketing folks and our accessibility folks sort of on the same team, right? To say, because you do have some marketing folks who resist accessibility for whatever reason they have, perceived impacts on aesthetics or something like that. But this is definitely an area where they can both be sort of on the same team fighting the same battle with respect to SEO and accessibility. I don't know the real business impact of those sorts of things, but I imagine at the very least, if it's crap now and you improve it, it's going to be better. But what's that mean for revenue? I don't know.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, at least those specific things that you just listed off are all search engine optimization best practices. Those are things that you want to be doing regardless. and you want to be doing for your users. And quite frankly, once you start having a clear and defined page structure, that's when you start allowing something like Google Home understand your content better and understand how to make it, how to surface it, whether it's a search engine or potentially audio, how to be able to
Yeah.
surface it to their audience, whoever that audience is, and however they're trying to consume it.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
so when you're getting, yes, Arthur, you have that look in your face of
The
something
question,
you're,
the question look.
yes.
Well, what I wanted to ask, just to, and I don't want to focus too much on the fear aspect, but just to drive it home to business owners why they should be considering this. I'm curious to hear more about some of the lawsuits that you've seen come in and kind of what they revolved around specifically.
Well, in my opinion, there's two classes of lawsuits. There would be the ethical kind and the unethical kind. Those are my two big buckets. So I'll focus on the ethical kind first. The ethical kind would be coming from, and it would be a legal complaint, not necessarily a lawsuit. It would be coming from somebody who has a legitimate problem with the website, and they contact the site owner and they say, look, we have a person we represent who's having a problem with your site. Can you fix it? Right. And that usually starts working towards a collaborative approach towards resolving the issue. The time that those become real lawsuits is only when those negotiations, those back and forth collaborations, when that stuff falls apart, then a lawsuit gets filed. And so in those are, it's interesting. Those are really kind of expensive. I have a graphic on one of my blog posts. It's a flow chart for dealing with legal risks and accessibility, and every single path that you possibly take results in one endpoint, and that's that you fix your site. And so the one advice I would give just in general is, if you get a lawsuit, just don't dig your heels in. Even if you know it's an ADA troll, don't dig your heels in, because it's going to be more expensive to deal with it later. But let me describe the unethical side of this too. Because other legal firms have achieved success with this thing, I basically say now the rats have found the path to the cheese. And that is that in the United States, our court system is separated into districts. I think we have something like 13 districts around the United States. There's like California, Florida, New York, and there's the Southern District of New York and Eastern District. Anyway, there's like 13 districts, I think. Some of those districts have been found to be more friendly to disability rights than others. And so a lawyer in those districts might have found certain success in filing lawsuits in those districts. So because they've done that, now they feel confident in just sending out these demand letters. And the demand letter is, your site's inaccessible. We had this person who's an aggrieved party. You have to pay us money. And so that's where it gets bad. Some of those plaintiffs will go away for $4,000. I don't know what your lawyers cost. My lawyer is $500 an hour. So I don't even want to talk to the guy unless I absolutely have to. But you think about how many hours of work am I going to be paying for $4,000 out of my lawyer? Forget it. I'll just send out the check. You know what I mean? But then there's this other side where there's this gray area with some of these guys where they'll say, we're going to settle for reasonable attorney's fees plus a lot of stipulations. So this is where I guess as a direct answer to your question, Arthur, when it comes to what they look like, the settlements always include fixing your site. So, and that's because with the ADA, you can get what's known as injunctive relief and reasonable attorney's fees. The injunctive relief is basically a court-ordered mandate that you fix your site. And then reasonable attorney's fees are what gets negotiated. And that can be, a lot if you dig your heels in, or not much. And that's the part where we're talking about some of the challenges that you face. You're always going to have to fix your site. That's just given, no matter who it is. When you dig your heels in, all you're doing is accumulating legal fees, your own legal fees for your lawyer, and the legal fees for the plaintiff. So
Gotcha.
just
Okay.
So fix your site.
Just
fix the site.
Start with fixing your site. Begin fixing your site. Gotcha. Okay. So when you're getting started with accessibility, let's go there. Where are the most important areas you need to focus on at the beginning?
There's a couple of things that we know based upon our experiences and even some of our research where we're likely to find accessibility problems, even if I've never seen the site. I know if somebody comes to me and says, we need to make our website accessible, I know from doing this for 20 years and the cumulative 300 some odd audits that me and my team have all done in our careers, we know exactly where those problems are going to be. Your forms are going to have problems with labeling. Your form error handling is going to be bad. Your images are not going to have good alt attributes. Your navigation is going to be difficult to use. And all of your JavaScript is probably not going to be usable with a keyboard only. We know that those are the things in general that we're going to find no matter who comes at us. If it's their first audit, it's always going to have that stuff. So going back to the question about where can somebody start, I would say start looking at those sorts of things, especially if a user interacts with it. So in the case of a form, if a user interacts with that form, and of course we want them to interact with the form because that's how they convert into customers or something like that. Look at the accessibility of your forms. Look at your image alt attributes and look at your navigational structures and your general templates. Look at that stuff to the extent that you already know, like internally, what the accessibility requirements are on those. Fix that stuff before you ever talk to a consultant or some sort of expert on the topic, because you know that that's where you're going to have your problems.
And so from say a business owner's perspective or a small business owner's perspective, ask these questions. Like, take this little bit that we just had there. Ask your developer, hey, is this going to be accessible? And some of them might say, yeah. And then you can ask and tell me about my menus. Tell me about my images. Tell me about whatever it is. Like, ask these little things and see how they answer. Because there are a lot of developers, like literally we had one client come up to us and say, our scope of work said that our website is accessible. And that's it. And it was a big site. That's all it said was it will. And they're like, we don't know what they did. We don't know what they tested. We have no idea how they determined it. And so I'm like, well, your site probably isn't to the degree that you want to be, at least in Ontario for 2021. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And some of those web developers don't know what they don't know, right? You know, they know accessibility is important. They know probably some best practices or something like that, but they don't really know what accessibility is. And so when the customer says, is it going to be accessible? They're like, yeah. Because what are you going to do? Say no and then possibly lose the deal? No. Okay. Yes, it's going to be accessible.
Gotcha.
And
okay. And so go on.
When you say ask them a question about how, whether they've done these accessibility things, I would follow up when they say yes. I'd follow up with a question to say, how is it accessible? What did you do to make it accessible?
Yeah. Dig into it a little bit because it is a legal requirement. So you want to be, in many cases, not just a legal requirement. It is a requirement for 10, 15% easy, probably more if you want to take it to ease of use of your website, of people visit. It's kind of like at one point people were like saying, mobile phone access is important for your website, and it's 15% of your website, and you're like, well, I don't want to pay money for 15% of my website, and you just basically lost those people, or they had a much more difficult time on your site, and it's still, and so like actually say no, that's actually a huge number of people. Number of people. Okay, so where should small businesses turn for support in terms of understanding and executing these requirements? And obviously the development partner is going to be one of them. I would say actually with WordPress, like if a lot of people use WordPress as one of the big platforms, one of the things you want to look at, say if you're kind of more doing it yourself or your developer is using a theme, actually have that as one of the check boxes for the theme, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
WordPress themes out there and a ton of them really suck at this.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. You know, we talked about this before the live stream started, where you know sometimes the theme itself is just going to put you at a disadvantage when you start out trying to be accessible. Sometimes page builder type things can be somewhat problematic because you lock the template into this some of this business logic behind the theme builder and things like that. But on the other side, especially with regard to WordPress, I like the fact that you can be in full control of your accessibility.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, sometimes that involves, you know, starting from scratch, you know. So for instance, for me, when I was making some of my own sites based on WordPress, I had my own theme. I called it the Day One theme, and it was literally just a WordPress theme that had absolutely no styling, no structure or anything like that. And it was just like, you know, the functions for get the navigation, get the header, the loop, and that was it. And then that's what I started from.
Gotcha. Now, so for people who are like, what are you guys talking about? Themes and all this kind of stuff. Just to give you an idea, a platform like WordPress or Shopify or Wix or Squarespace will have sort of a basic out of the box capability. In many cases, that basic out of the box capability, because it's being built by a large company, WordPress has some default themes as well. Shopify does, will already have a lot of this built in. But of course, people don't want to just look like that or act like that. They want more. And then what you can do quite often is purchase additional or get free themes that change the look, change some of the functionality of your website. And oftentimes they are not done by the big company that's kind of behind it or the community that's behind WordPress. And therefore, just like anything where anybody can do anything, it layers on JavaScript and ways of doing things that just do not have these requirements under being paid attention to. And quite frankly, I would say if the theme isn't said like, yes, we've made this accessible, my belief is, and we're not really thinking about anything other than visuals and kind of cool experiences because that's what sells. We're probably not even thinking about search engine optimization and individual URLs and all of these other things that go into making the whole of your website fully what it can be, because they're just not thinking that. They're literally thinking gadgets and gadgets and cool animated graphics and stuff that really, from what I've seen, right? It's not going to always be.
And I tend to agree. If somebody's not specifically sort of bragging about the accessibility of that theme, probably isn't. Sometimes those are still not great either, but you can pretty much guarantee if they're not talking about accessibility, it's just not accessible.
I actually think of it as a level of professionalism of the developer. Okay, so is there, like where should a small business turn in terms of support? Again, let's take a look at that. What do they need to do? How do they need to approach this? Obviously, choose the right theme, ask the questions. Is there anything that they could do, like you guys?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of consulting firms. Throughout the world. There's some actually in your neck of the woods in Toronto. There's plenty in the United States. Sometimes those can be. Sometimes we can be priced in a way that puts us out of the budget for a small business.
Right.
Just to be frank, our hourly rate for consulting work is high enough that we're too expensive for small businesses. But a little bit of a sales pitch here, I guess, for my own stuff is that there are tools out there, including ours, that are priced in a way that can be used by people who are budget constrained. There's free accessibility testing tools. The Wave accessibility toolbar has been one that has been a staple for people since forever. And so there's free stuff. There's paid stuff like our product Tenon, which is priced in tiers that can be useful for people who are budget constrained, and they're gonna be, they know they're not gonna be doing high volume testing and all that sort of stuff anyway. And there's also tons of free resources online. Just to sing the praises of my friends at WebAIM again, webaim.org has on their website tons of really great information. So I don't know if the small business owner would necessarily be a consumer of that information, but definitely their designer would be a consumer of that information. A lot of the W3C's Web Accessibility Initiative content is pretty heavy lifting when it comes to reading the stuff, but it's exhaustive. So, again, going back to probably not something you put in the hands of a business owner, but definitely in their developers.
So I guess, correct me if this is perception is correct. Now, we also do it oftentimes with the support of a company like yours. And we're clearly beefing up our capability. Your designer and your content person, like whoever's creating your graphics, maybe your infographics, your blog content, your page content, I would encourage them to actually go to get some sort of course so they understand some of the basics, color contrast. Like you're gonna get, whatever it is, yellow on white, and the contrast of the color is not high enough, so people can't really see it well, especially if there's some vision impairment going on. That sort of thing, you might think, well, my web developer built my website, we're accessible. Well, no, you've got people adding content to your site, and they're not necessarily doing it in a way that supports this initiative.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that, because that is one of the areas where people do get into trouble and continue to stay in trouble. We have a customer, for instance, who they have they're an organization that has a lot of sub-organizations, and they allow those sub-organizations to put content on the main site for the parent organization. And that it has become sort of the Wild West, where people really don't know much about web development, just get in the CMS and they start typing content using the WYSIWYG editor on there and submitting the stuff, and it's terrible. So yeah, I definitely agree with you that the content authors really need to have education around this. Since we have been talking about WordPress a number of times already, Joe Dolson has created a really awesome plugin called Access Monitor. And what that does is you as a site owner can actually set a threshold for accessibility, that if the content that the page author has put in there is inaccessible, it can't even be published until they fix the problems. So that's cool.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice.
I'm posting up a link to the plugin. People need to know about this.
That's good. Okay, so where would you recommend, if you say, you know what, I have a blogger or my content person, my web admin, I'd like them to have some training on this. Just go for some training. Where would you recommend they go?
So it's me, of course.
Awesome. Okay, tenon.io.
Yeah. So we've been doing some training online. Usually the training we've been giving has been in person. I think in person is the best way of learning. But because of the pandemic, in-person training's kind of gone out the window. So we've been doing some of those online. It's tenon.eventbrite.com. We don't have specific content author training just yet, but we're going to be putting a course up there pretty soon. Also, another one that's going to be done very soon is on PDF accessibility, which would be great. A lot of higher ed A lot of higher ed and a lot of state and local government agencies do a lot of PDF stuff, and so that's a big deal. And also, lots of restaurants do their menus in PDF. So PDF training is coming up soon too. There's also some good stuff on lynda.com for accessibility. If you go on lynda.com, there's been a number of really smart people who've done courses there as well.
Nice. Okay, so you mentioned Joel Dawson's plugin. I believe tenon.io, you have a plugin that integrates with WordPress and it'll actually do
That's Joe's
page
plugin.
Evaluation. Oh, that's actually Joe's. Okay,
yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
And then, so can there be, like, say I don't have a very accessible website, can I get an accessibility overlay or plugin that then just fixes it?
Well, there's companies out there who tell you that they can do that. It's literally impossible to do. And I'll tell you, this is what I tell people when they ask me, if I use Tenon and I get 0 errors back from Tenon, does that mean I'm fully WCAG compliant? And I say no. As a matter of fact, just from an automated testing perspective, I can't tell you if you meet any of the WCAG success criteria. So let's take for 1.1.1. For those who don't know what that is, it's basically about having text alternatives for non-text content, which largely means alternatives for images. I can tell you if you don't have one of those. I can say there's no programmatically determinable alternative. I can also we do about 25 other tests for heuristics that make the alternative crappy, but I can't tell you if you've passed. Okay. So if I can't tell you you've passed, I certainly can't fix it either. You know what I mean?
Right.
So the number of things, we have this big list of things here that are accessibility best practices. Here's the number that I can tell you you've not failed, and then here's the number that an automated tool can overlay can fix.
So in terms of like an image there, just to focus on that, like you could have an alt text in, like you have a picture of a dog, you have an alt text, and the alt text says cat. You haven't passed. Your test might say yes, you have alt text.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and and that would pass any automated tool, literally any automated tool.
Okay.
And kind of, if you think about it, it should, right? What if your dog is named Cat?
Right.
Because it all comes down to intention. It all comes down, when it comes to like a text alternative, it all comes down to intent. It all comes down to the meaning you're hoping to convey with that. So if your dog's name is Cat and your alt attribute says Cat, then you've actually
passed.
Yeah, you're awesome. So that's the problem with machine. That's the problem with machine testing. Here's what I tell people. I say, look, the benefit of having an automated tool like Tenon is efficiency, right? Because I can, if we think about this metric that I like to think through sometimes, is the time to bug, right? So we know we're going to discover some accessibility issues, and we know we're going to have to fix them. The first step in fixing it is actually logging the problem, recognizing that the problem exists, and logging it into some sort of system that a developer can then go through and use as the list of things that they have to fix. So there's this time to bug metric. Time to bug metric on manual testing is at best a few minutes, right? You'd find the problem, you then have to log the problem and articulate it in a way that needs to be fixed. So we're talking minutes, maybe an experienced person, maybe 4 minutes, something like that. Time to bug on an automatic testing tool is in 4 minutes. 4 minutes, I can tell you hundreds of thousands of problems, right? So I can crawl through an entire website, can test thousands of problems, thousands of pages in that time, and I can discover roughly about 3,000 failure conditions on a given page. So that's where automatic testing is great, because the time to bug is hundreds of a second to get that bug logged. So that's where automatic testing fits in this whole thing, is being able to discover large volumes of issues very quickly. But there's still a lot of stuff that a tool can't find, and that's where the humans are going to have to come in. But we don't want to pay humans to do things that machines can do.
Okay, so now we've got the automated testing, we've got a few other things. Again, from a business owner's perspective, one thing that we've talked about recently, maybe you could just elucidate, like go into it a little bit, is the difference between an audit and a high-level review.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we have people ask for this, the high level review versus an audit a lot. And it's kind of difficult when you're, especially when you do a lot of audits, not to get too into the weeds. But here's how I would regard a high level audit or high level review, which would be you get a cursory overview of what the core system tasks are and determine whether they meet basic requirements for things like focus management, keyboard accessibility, good solid structure, things like that. And in that high level review process, it's going to say, we found these problems. These are the likely causes of those problems, and you need to investigate further. An audit is really sort of exhaustive, right? In an audit scenario, for instance, for Tenon, we have a checklist of about 260, 300 individual checkpoints that represent our efforts at extrapolating what WCAG means, what WCAG compliance means. And we go through that. We have not only the check items themselves, but we have defined steps for verifying whether that check item applies in the first place, and what are the exact steps it takes to verify whether that system has complied with that checkpoint or not. And it's extremely exhaustive, and hopefully exhaustive enough that you're able to find every single problem. There's another step though, which would be usability testing, but that's the kind of thing that I think should be done really last, right?
Right.
Automatic testing would be done first. So we're not testing, or so we're not doing manual testing on things that don't need to be done manually.
Mm-hmm.
You follow that up with the manual testing and the full audit, and get that stuff out of the way. And then if you have budget and time and stuff like that, usability testing. But that would be after we've found and fixed all those other things, so the usability testing can give us the best value.
Gotcha. So here's the way. I'm just going to go for a small kind of website, whatever that happens to be. Would this be a decent structure to at least move you forward and allow you to understand where you're at, which is get some automated testing done. Okay. Oh, lots of whatever's, warnings, definitely a problem, that kind of stuff. You get a little bit of a sense. Perhaps engage a company like yours, perhaps ours, in a high level, or your developer in a high level review, especially if they've got the experience with accessibility. And then from that high level review, you can say, okay, we kind of have a sense of where we're going with this. We're going to fix a bunch of this stuff up. Would you recommend always doing audit? Because my understanding is high level review to audit is like orders of magnitude, $1,000 to $10,000, that type of thing.
Yeah. I'm actually going to throw a wrench in those plans entirely and say training is the first thing that they need to do.
Gotcha. Okay.
Very
good.
Now,
Very good.
An automated tool, one of the things that you can use an automated tool for as well is sort of a sniff test, right? I already mentioned that looking at a site, I can tell you sort of where the areas are going to be a problem, what areas are going to be a problem. An automated tool is sort of like doing that without the guesswork or without the assumption work. An automated tool, you can think of, I told you that there's only a subset of things that a tool can do, but the other thing that you can get from that is a sniff test of what those problems really are. And so you can assume that if they have problems with their form labels, like if the automatic test comes back and there's no form labels, I could pretty much guarantee you that their error handling is terrible too. I
Right.
can't, from machine testing, I can't tell you that I can't test the error handling with the machine testing. But if I see a bunch of automatic results that tell us that we got no labels, then we're pretty much guaranteed that there's going to be error handling problems too.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
what
And for everybody who's listening, that means like the integrity of what's being entered in the form actually matches what needs to be entered in the form. So whatever that form needs to produce for you, people could put in nonsense, people could put in incorrect stuff, or and you're not necessarily going to get the data that you want. And that's error.
Yeah. And the other part too, from an accessibility perspective, is that the user may have significant challenges and frustration avoiding problems and recovering from those problems so that they can put in the information as well.
Right. Okay.
So where training is going to come in with this is at all levels, what's going to happen is training is going to help you recover from your coding errors quickly if you're the developer and avoid them in the future, right? So automated testing and audit, that's going to tell you what your problems are now, but training is going to help you first off fix those problems and avoid them down the road so that you don't commit those same errors over and over again.
All right. Any last things we should discuss before we move on? This has been a really, I love that we went in depth with this because this is one of those things which I think most people would be more than willing to just stick their head in the sand with.
Yeah, because it seems nebulous, right?
Yeah.
It seems really nebulous.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's another thing I would also probably recommend along the way, and that is that a website and a business owner should have the capability of supporting users with disabilities when they use the site. In other words, there should be a way that a customer who has disabilities, who's having a technical challenge, can easily and quickly just reach out to the business to get help. Now, there's a twofold reason for this, right? One is, of course, the civil rights aspect of helping out people with disabilities, but there's also a greedy business person aspect to this too, because this is a person who wants to give you money, and giving them the opportunity to reduce that friction between their wallet and your wallet. That's why I'm also a really strong advocate of having some sort of mechanism of contact that's very easy for a person with disabilities to do. If they have a problem with the checkout process and can contact you to do an alternate mechanism of doing that, then supply that as well. I think that obviously the website and the checkout process should be accessible, but if you're in a situation where you're sort of working on that and you've not yet finished that work to be done, then at the very least, give them a way to contact you and get that they need.
Sure. And I mean, your website is not a static being, right? You're going to be like, okay, now we want to add cross sells into our checkout process or whatever, upsells or whatever it is. You have new things that are getting added to it. And things can happen. You can get a plugin update with WordPress, say, for instance, or something, and that changes what's happening. And you may not realize that it has had an impact that you haven't expected. I mentioned on an earlier show that CNN, for the longest while, it just recently got fixed on my phone and a few other people's phones, a Samsung, Chrome, whatever. The article would get cut off halfway down and it wouldn't show the rest because the read more that it wanted to show ahead of time and show an ad underneath was just freaking busted. And there's no mechanism to communicate with them. I would have loved an accessibility page in communication, because then I could say, there's somebody on the other side who wants to hear me having a problem with their website. And I would go through that channel because that would be the easiest channel to go through, whether or not I'm actually having an accessible problem or there's just a problem with the darn website. I mean, things happen all the time. On the online world, they happen like ridiculously fast. And so just that ability to say, hey, customer, we want you to have a good experience here. Tell us if you're not. And that way you can go back to your developer or your designer or whoever, your content person, and say, oh, we've got a problem, something for us to fix. Same thing would happen if, you know, you had a storefront and somebody was like, I can't get in your store. Can you help me?
Yeah.
And then eventually you'd be like, I think I need to fix that.
Yeah.
Hopefully sooner rather than later. And I know there's laws around that and they vary, but you'd be like, okay, right. That's one of the things we're doing as we're continuously improving our relationship with our clients.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
All right. I love it. Any last things before we go into the outro?
That is it.
That is so good, Karl. Okay, everybody that's watching, I know it's been a bit of a long one. It's an important one. It's an important one because business is people. Your clients are people. There's a massive, like I literally mean massive audience out there. Actually, it doesn't even matter the massiveness. There are people out there that want to work with you, that want to have a relationship with you, want to have a relationship with your business or your organization, and they aren't having the easiest time of it. And if there's anything that's happening in this day and age is realizing that you talked about civil rights, human rights, is realizing that we aren't here to leave anybody behind. We have the capacity. We actually, in North America, I'll just say this, we have, as much as you might feel like we're struggling right now, pandemic and all that kind of stuff, start learning this stuff. This is not a I can't send my kids to college type situation. This is something that you can deal with. You just might have to make a little bit of awareness, a little bit of decisions, a little bit of questioning, a little bit of humility as you might not get it right. So you leave that ability to have that conversation open with that person. I love that one, Karl. I think that's actually probably the gold of this one, is to have that conversation and show a willingness to have that conversation, not just, oh, I don't have time for this. It's like, yes, I want you to have a good experience with me. Tell me if you're not. And just start like we talk about marketing and investing. Marketing's a journey and all this kind of stuff. Your relationship with your clients is a journey. And there is I remember having an argument, Karl. I think it was really when I started getting excited about accessibility, like 10 years ago, and we did the whole WordCamp thing and all that kind of stuff. And I remember having this argument with somebody who was like, oh, it's a car website. People who are blind don't drive cars. I don't have to be accessible. And I was like, what?
Right.
You absolutely have to be accessible with this thing. You do not know who's like, just on the, never mind about anything else other than it might be the dad who is helping out the child figure out the car research, or like, it's just like mind-blowing to say, really? It may be somebody who has colorblind, right? And but they can still drive. It may be like me. There's you. Okay. It could be, so like motor difficulties does not necessarily mean this or that. It could be somebody who's like doing market research for their agency and now they can't because they can't, like, there's a ridiculous amount of stuff where as soon as you start going into, you know what, that they're not my audience anyways. You do not understand the crazy complexity of this world. And what you're basically saying is, basically what you're doing is you as a business owner who want business is saying, the way we do this is I'm a bouncer at this nightclub, and if you aren't pretty, you're not getting in.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And if that's your business, because you have a nightclub and you want the beautiful people in there, I don't know, whatever, cool. But I can almost guarantee everybody who's watching this, it's not supposed to be some sort of, your business is not supposed to be an exclusive club. Most of you. Right? So not in terms of your website anyways. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Karl. You're ridiculously awesome.
Time for the
time for the shades. We actually have a bit of an outro.
You've tuned in to COVID Marketing with Brent Kobayashi and Arthur Tuck, the show to support small business not just to survive, but to thrive.
Thank you for joining us on this episode number, I believe it's 83.
83.
It's 83. Fantastic. We've been doing this for 4 freaking months plus. Fantastic stuff. Thank you so much, very much, Karl. I'm really glad we had the opportunity to dig into this topic. Such an important one. Great. We will see everybody tomorrow.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you
Thank you,
so
Karl.
much.
I've shared a link in the chat so people can find you at Tannen.
All right.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Wonderful. All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Peace, everybody.